or do you also video?
Good afternoon, guys. Happy New Year. Welcome to the podcast. I've got a fantastic guest for you today, Liz Steblay. She's an author. She's also an entrepreneur, and she wrote the book talking about becoming a solopreneur, and it's titled Succeeding as a Solopreneur: 6 Keys to Taking the Leap, Winning Clients, and Building Wealth. For the audience out there, we're going to talk about solo, creating your own dreams, entrepreneurship, and I'm really happy to have her on. So Liz, welcome.
Thank you. I'm all things about self-employment and building wealth.
Yeah, and I love how it really resonates with the audience. So briefly introduce yourself and we'll dive into the questions.
Yeah, sure. I've been a solopreneur before the word was ever invented. I fell into being self-employed back in 2004, over 20 years ago, when I got laid off. And I called a former client that I'd had when I was a consultant for a large firm. And I said, do you need any help? And he said, are you kidding? How soon can you get here? So I literally fell into it, had my first client before I even had a laptop. And then I made several mistakes, stumbled along the way, managed to make it work, and said, I'm never going back to a full-time job, especially after that first year when I realized I'd worked fewer hours, made more money, didn't have to deal with the big firm BS, and had more quality time with my kid. I said, I'm definitely never going back. About 5 years after that, I started my first company, which is a matchmaking agency for Fortune 500 companies and consultants who specialize in organizational effectiveness. As a result of growing that into being a national multi-million-dollar company, I got the reputation as the person to call if you have questions about being self-employed. And then about 8 years ago, I created PICA, the Professional Independent Consultants of America, to help people launch and grow their own businesses.
Fascinating. Yeah, I saw this interview on Bloomberg with Jamie Dimon. They were talking about how he was passed over as Treasury Secretary and he had to come back as he hasn't had a boss in over 30-something, 40-something years. And he said he wasn't going to start. So, one of the wealthiest men in the world doesn't want a boss that says something to the listeners. So
yes, I used to say I was unemployable. My clients a couple of times, my clients tried to hire me full time and I said, I'm unemployable. So I'm too used to running my life in this crazy way. I used to tell my clients and manage their expectations. I'm offline between 5 and 9 p.m. because that's the quality time with my daughter. I was a single mom at the time. And I said, so, I'll be unreachable, but then you'll get emails from me at 10, 11, midnight. And that's just how I roll. No, clients never had a problem with it as long as they knew in advance that that's when I was not reachable. So yes, I'm all about being unemployable.
Yeah, we'll dive right into it and we'll kick things off. Talk about discovering the 6 keys to succeeding as a solopreneur.
Like I mentioned, it was all about learning on my own. These resources didn't exist 20 years ago, like how to be self-employed. And the word solopreneur obviously didn't exist. And also over the last 8 years, I've coached thousands of people to making the leap to self-employment by leaving their corporate jobs and setting up their own business, either as an independent consultant, an interim executive, fractional leader, executive coaches. And so a lot of the stories and lessons that I learned and that are in the book are also based on all these people that I have coached over the years. So there are 6 keys to success. They're interrelated and not necessarily sequential, but the first one, of course, is to be prepared to vanquish FUD. And FUD is fear, uncertainty, and doubt. When you're thinking about becoming self-employed, I call it the FUD monster. It's that creature that whispers in your ear, were you to step out of a highly lucrative medical career and start out on your own? What are you, nuts? Giving up a full salary and the benefits? So the FUD monster is louder and larger than life when you're thinking about taking the leap. And especially for that first year, there's going to be more fear, uncertainty, and doubt than you've ever had at any other point in your career, because you have to learn things you've never done. You have to do things you've never done before. You have to learn how to price your services, how to negotiate contracts, all these things that have nothing to do with our core expertise. But that's why it's key number one, because the FUD never fully goes away. I've been self-employed 20 years and the FUD monster still whispers in my ear from time to time. So there's strategies for how to mitigate that FUD.
Yeah. And another question I have for you is, when we talk about a lot of individuals, what is the difference between solopreneur and an entrepreneur, a business owner?
Yeah, obviously they're related. Both have to do with being self-employed, but solopreneurs aren't interested in growing beyond just them. They're not interested in building a boutique agency or a larger business or having employees or all the headaches that go along with that. They just want to do what they love to do and do very well, make a good living, and call it a great career. It's not about climbing the corporate ladder or achieving multi-millions of dollars of business through having employees. And another big differentiator is solopreneurs don't necessarily produce products. In fact, I don't know of a single solopreneur who makes their business by creating widgets. Now, some people will create downloadable ebooks or downloadable tools that you can buy, but that's a lot different than manufacturing a widget. So most solopreneurs are knowledge workers who are selling their expertise.
And that's quite interesting that you brought that up, because a lot of people go from like kind of an employee to just they want to control their time or scale their time or control their income. Talk about, because you mentioned a solopreneur is a self-employed individual. So basically, for those looking to get out of the time trap, how being a business owner or entrepreneur is different from a solopreneur.
Yeah, for one thing, you're responsible for everything. You have to learn how to be your own tech support, which is for me, the most frustrating part of being self-employed. But it is a balance, and your cash flow is going to be like a Richter scale when you're self-employed. I don't care what sort of business it is, but I've never known a solopreneur whose income or cash flow comes along like a Mazda motor at an even pace. Mine, when I was doing independent consulting before I started either of my two businesses, my income ranged from $5,000 a month to $24,000 a month. Obviously, $24,000 a month is a pretty good living, but you can't live as a single mom on $5,000 a month in San Francisco. You have to be prepared for the ups and downs of their erratic cash flow. And one of the best ways I have a couple tricks for this, but one of the best ways, of course, is to make sure that you're getting paid what you're worth. And there's a whole chapter in the book about this, actually more than one chapter, because it's one of the keys is being paid what you're worth. So I think there's 3 chapters dedicated to it. But whether it's pricing by the hour or fixed rate pricing or package pricing or some sort of hybrid pricing that I'm a big fan of, you have to make sure that you're charging enough. But the biggest mistake I see people make when they step out to being self-employed is they're not charging enough. And it takes a lot of confidence to charge a lot. There's tricks for that in the book as well. You have to be paid what you're worth. My other favorite tip for handling that erratic cash flow is, even though I have an MBA, I have no fiscal discipline whatsoever. I used to hide money from myself because the first year that I was self-employed, I had to pay my quarterly tax. I don't remember what it was. Let's say $12,000. I didn't have the money available. And I freaked out because I was not going to get into that whole downward spiral of interest and penalties, whatever. I think I borrowed the money from my brother, but whatever. I said, I'm never going to be caught short again. So from that point on, every time a client paid an invoice, I took 40% of that invoice and I put it into a different bank. Not my normal bank, because if I log in and I see I have $8,000 in savings, I'll say to my daughter, ooh, we have enough money to go on vacation, because I have no fiscal discipline. So I would hide the money from myself. And then when it's time for quarterly taxes, I transfer the money to my checking account, pay the quarterly taxes. And then the magic happened during my annual tax return. I'd go to the secret bank and I'd have anywhere from $20,000 to $25,000 left over. That's what went into my self-employed retirement accounts and lowers your effective tax rate. Then you invest it, and that's the gift that keeps on giving. So that's my favorite trick, is to hide the money from yourself, use what's left over to put into your retirement. And that's one of the first steps to building wealth.
Yeah. I think what you're talking about is the concept from profit first is what it sounds like. The next question I have for you is, I was reading this startling statistic that the reason why a lot of people can't afford to retire is because of health insurance. And so they're stuck to their jobs and they hate their jobs. They hate their boss. They don't believe in the work. So talk about, as a solopreneur, how you can get out of this health insurance trap and achieve your dreams.
This is one of the biggest FUDs about being self-employed, for sure. So I'll tell you, last year I turned 60. I'm healthy. I live in Nevada, and my health insurance, I have a high deductible plan because it's another way to save money in a health spending account. or health savings account. But my deductible is $6,000 and I pay $895 a month in health insurance. But let's just round up 12 grand a year. That's a lot of money to go out of pocket. Now, my business pays for it, so it's a tax deductible business expense. So there's that. But the other part is you have to charge enough to be able to afford it. Goes back to having the confidence to charge higher rates. And when a client pushes back on you, when you're in lining up work with somebody and they'll say, wow, that's a lot more than we had budgeted for. That's a lot more than we were planning on. Say, listen, I realize my rates may seem high. I'm running a business. I have to cover my own insurance, my own vacation time, and my own health insurance. And usually when you mention health insurance, everybody's, oh, that explains why it's so expensive.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another issue is the health insurance here in the United States. The another question I have for you is, I love how you set boundaries. You talked about just not being available, and just a lot of people, when they see this, sometimes I hear the common comment is they're stuck up, or they're just showing that they don't have to do this. How do you address this idea of setting boundaries and not responding to this type of criticism?
Yeah, I call it one of the keys to success I found over the years was having a wow meeting at the beginning of every engagement. This is true no matter what type of work you do. And wow stands for ways of working. So whenever I started a consulting engagement, I would take the client out to lunch. And I said, I don't really want to talk about the project or whatever. I just want to get to know each other and how we can work best together. And I said, one thing you need to know about me is I'm a single mom, and I have my daughter. I split custody. I have my daughter Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, which means on those days, I'm going to be offline between 5 and 9 because it's when I pick her up from daycare and then get her ready for bed. And that's our quality time. And so I explained this all in advance. And as I said earlier, clients never had an issue because they'd already set their expectations at the beginning. And then kids are a great excuse. But let's say that you're an avid runner and every day you like to be running between 7 and 8:30 in the morning. And you just need to let people know in advance. This is one of the reasons I'm self-employed, or one of the things, how I can be so effective at what I do and so focused or so grounded is because I carve out this time for myself, and whether it's yoga or running or whatever, and just say, I'm not available from these hours to these hours. And then you have to stick to it. So I would actually block out my calendar. Particularly in consulting, often you're on a shared system where people can see each other's calendars, and mine literally would say out of office 5 to 9 p.m. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Yeah. And same thing when you're self-employed. A lot of people feel like I can't really go on vacation, or I'm never truly unplugged, or I don't get to rest and recover. Use that out of office message. Before I go on vacation for the 2 weeks prior, there's a red line at the bottom of my signature footer that says vacation alert. I will be out of the office offline from January 31 to February 15. And then I set up the out of office autoresponder. And sure, my assistant knows how to get a hold of me if something's really critical or something's on fire, but that almost never happens. So yes, it's more about, it sounds people just need to say to themselves, it's in your own head. It's okay to set boundaries. You don't have to be available 24/7. We're all human. We all have lives. We all have things to take care of. But setting those expectations in advance is the key.
I love that. We talked about health insurance, and for a lot of people that aren't aware, discuss just 6 keys to success to pay less in tax and keep more of what you earn. What are your favorite tips for doing this?
Besides finding money for myself and putting it into my retirement, that's the single best thing that you can do, actually, is when you're self-employed, getting paid on a 1099 basis, not on a temporary W-2, but on a business-to-business 1099 basis, your retirement contribution limits are, I think, 4x higher than if you were paid on a W-2 participating in a traditional 401k. So every penny that you can put away or hide from yourself and put into one of your self-employed retirement accounts, that lowers your effective tax rate right there because you're not being taxed on that money. So whether it's a health, I would do all the above, a health spending account and contribute to a solo 401k or SEP IRA, because that's what lowers your effective tax rate, and then invest that wisely. So that's one of the most important ways to build wealth over time.
Yeah. And how difficult is it to set up a HSA for yourself?
Super easy. Go to hsabank.com. It literally takes seconds. Or but your bank might have a relationship with an HSA, it's a health savings account vendor. Most banks, I don't know, this must be some sort of FDIC rules or whatever, but most banks don't offer their own plans. For example, I bank with Charles Schwab, but they do not have an HSA directly from their platform, but they do partner with some. Now, people might think that an HSA, you can only save, I forget what it is. I'm going to say $4,500, and it changes every year. I'm going to say $4,500 as an individual and something like $8,500 for a family. That doesn't seem like very much money. However, I think it's Fidelity. It comes out every year with an estimate. And last year's estimate was that the average couple in retirement will spend over $100,000 per person on health-related expenses that are not covered by Medicare. So my goal is to get that HSA account up to 100K. I'm only at 35K so far, but right, it's invested and it can grow, and it will be tax-free when I pull it out and use it for medical related expenses. Plus you can borrow against that money. So let's say that, oh, this actually happened. I had to have my lateral sewer line replaced. Okay, the first estimate was $14,000. Okay, I do not have $14,000 sitting around to blow on replacing a sewer line. And I didn't end up doing this, but what I could do is as long as I had saved my health receipts, I could borrow from my HSA and reimburse myself for the health receipts that I did, the health things that I did pay out of pocket over the last 5 years.
Wow.
And that's allowed and tax-free.
Wow. So basically shifting the expense. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. So it's also like a rainy day fund, right? If you have a critical emergency, as long as you keep your health expenses, you can pull that money back out tax-free.
Wow. Interesting.
So there's lots of tricks and they all add up. The other thing that I would do is have a separate still do have a separate credit card set up for my business. It doesn't have to be issued in the name of your business. It can just be one that you don't use anymore, you have in the drawer, and just earmark that and say, I'm going to use this all for my business expenses. And whether you're gaining points or cash back or whatever, then it's all in one place. And again, all those little things add up over time. And then you order from staples.com. Like really, you're going to get audited on your Staples receipt. I ordered bottled water, coffee, tea, and then of course, paper, pens, and paper clips, right? That it all makes a difference.
Yeah, that's quite it. I know we're coming to the end. One thing that I have a question on is because a lot of the audience, they do what you did, they're corporate or they're high six figure, and to take a leap and then start as a solo can be risky and scary. So talk about risk. In 20 years ago, it was risky to start a business and it was risky to do what you and I did. But now I have guests coming on and saying it's risky not to do this. So talk about that aspect.
Yes, it can be risky not to do this because you never know when a layoff or a buyout's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
Things are shifting all the time in corporate America and in the health industry for sure. There's a way to prepare to make the leap without quitting your job, right? So what I encourage people to do is, if they're even thinking about this, is to start to position yourself as an expert in your field. So whether that's hosting a podcast or writing blogs or starting a newsletter or being a guest on a lot of podcasts or having a particular point of view about something. And there's a way that you can adapt your LinkedIn profile too, to position yourself as an expert, because people want to hire somebody who's an expert at whatever the problem is they're trying to solve. So you have to know narrow your niche, know what that is, and then you can start to build your reputation in that area while you're still a full-time salaried employee. It'll make the transition a lot easier. There's definitely a lot of practical tips for how to do that in my book, but that's the single easiest way to make the transition. And then, of course, keep your eyes open for a layoff and just raise your hand.
Yeah, I was joking with my colleague. We were having lunch the other day, and we were just discussing just companies and corporations. They can just basically how risky it is to work for a corporation these days. And like you have all these like rounds of interview, and then you get hired and you could get laid off the next day. It's just, or the offer could get revoked.
Yes, there's no job security. So you're actually, as long as you're smart enough to figure out what you don't know, which most of the people that listening to this podcast would fall into that category, you're probably better off betting on yourself than placing your trust into some unknown giant soulless entity.
Yeah. How can people find you and reach out to you? And if they want to hear more about what you do and learn from you, how can they do that?
Yes. So the easiest way, especially if people listen to this while they're running or driving, is to remember 6keys.info, not 6keys.com, because that was way too expensive. But 6keys.info is the landing page for the book or audiobook or ebook or whatever. And from there, there's links to me on LinkedIn or to the Professional Independent Consultants of America, et cetera. And then, so that would be the easiest thing to remember, 6keys.info. And then also several times a month, I offer free 15-minute Ask Me Anything sessions. It's like one of my favorite things to do, or I've never met these people and they pop in and they're like, I was thinking about leaving my corporate job, but I can't decide between X or Y. So whatever the topic is, whether it's pricing or branding or what negotiation, I love it. There's free 15-minute Ask Me Anything sessions. But again, you can find the landing page, 6keys.info, and then follow me on LinkedIn or sign up for my free newsletter or whatever. It all goes from there.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming on, and keep up the great work, and to your continued success in 2025.
Thank you. And here's to everybody creating the career of their dreams this year.